Welcome to another episode of our Identity Manager Angular web development video training. What we will do from now on is we will just talk to a web developer. And additionally to that, we will show you now how to edit and change code in the Identity Manager.imx client. Before we can start with that, it might make sense just to talk about two new things might be of interest for you. Number one. If we switch back to the screen, then you can easily see that here in my screen there is the GitHub project which hosts the Identity Manager.imx client. That it is. Two things I want to show you there. First of all, if I just switch to the branches, then you can see that more or less 3 different branches are available. There is the current branch, which is version 9.1. This is what you should use if that is even possible. And there is the old one, which is 8.2. Personally, I'm not really happy with that very first branch here, 8.2. This is for people only using web fronts on the basis of 8.2. If you have the chance to start again, that means from the scratch, then please use version 9.1 and this branch. The good message is today, this is the current branch. That means if you don't check something else out, you will automatically get the 9.1 branch. However, there is one branch more of interest in the meantime, and this is regarding to our video series. And this is the tutorial 01 branch. This is a branch that will show you now code changes and of course what we will develop in the next videos. However, if you want to see it again, if you want to recook it, if you want to analyze it, then please check out this tutorial 01 branch. This is it from a branch perspective. If you look again at our Identity Manager.imx client, then you can as well see there is one more folder. This is the web client. This is what you typically check out and change. This here is pretty new, and that is called the SDK samples. The SDK samples is something completely new. Here our developers start to collect code snippets. Code snippets you can use then later on just to change your web project. If we just open that, you see here currently 3 different files. This is what our developers just created right now. That whole thing is just expanding. And there is missing currently 1 folder more where you can find pre-released manuals for web development. This is something you will here see soon. In the meantime, you can start here with these folders, which contains, of course, the data around different things, for example, dashboards or tables. If we, for example, look in such a data table folder, then you will find here just document, and that specific document shows you in code snippets what's to do. For example, in the first picture, you can see how the regions on the screen are just named. And then you can find here specific components where our developers explaining how to use them. However, this is just growing. We will have more. And because it is part of GitHub, you will automatically check it out if you just check out the version 9.1 of this specific web portal. That means standard clone from Git will give you as well the samples. What we should as well talk about are the Identity Manager modules. Identity Manager modules always cover a specific functionality in the Identity Manager, and during the installation you can select some if you need them. For example, if you don't need an Exchange on-prem, you need not to select Exchange on-prem. If you need a SharePoint on-prem, for example, you can install SharePoint on-prem. The same thing for a lot of other things like attestation, all the cloud applications, whatever. All of these modules exist, and what you can see there is they are depending on each other. For example, there's the QBM module, and on the QBM module is depending the QER module. Both are as well important in web development. You will see that later on. We typically first compile our library here for QBM before we start to compile the QER library. However, some other modules exist. For example, there's the attestation module over there, which covers all about certification and attestation. If you want to change something that is regarding to attestation, it is a good idea to look into that specific module and change it there. This is what you need to know about modules. Additionally, you need to know, especially all the modules behind QER are dynamic modules. That means modules you can find on a customer installation, but it could be that it is not available in a customer installation. Depending on what the customer has installed, you will find one or the other. This is important because a standard Angular developer typically thinks in static modules. What you have now to learn is with the Identity Manager, it is necessary to think about in dynamic modules additionally. For this video, I just decided to invite a colleague of me from R&D. He is a real web developer in difference to me, Rafi Misaturian. Hello.
Hi, Herwig. Nice to meet you.
And Rafi will just help us here to understand now the technical details, the real technical details of the Angular web front. So I'm very happy that you are here, and now let's start. As we all know, during the last videos we talked a lot about the Angular front and all the installation and of course the space and how to build our first projects. Now, from a developer perspective, Rafi, what's to say about the Angular web space?
So our Angular projects are organized in something called an Angular workspace, which is so for everybody who has used Angular, who knows what that is. Basically, it's a structure where you can organize your projects. Right now, you're looking at VS Code, which is an IDE for the Angular workspace, but of course, you can use any other IDEs. It depends on you. Okay, so the Angular workspace, like I mentioned, consists of different projects. In our case, you can see that we have a lot of libraries and a couple of applications. So the libraries are like, for example, AAD, AOB, so on and so forth, consists of 3 letters, and the other ones are all applications, and we will dive deeper in another session into that. Then, of course, we have something like the package JSON, which describes which packages we are using, and it also contains something called scripts. So if you want to build something, if you want to build a library, if you want to build an application in different configuration modes, meaning you can do it for development, you can do it for production, you should use your these kind of scripts. Yeah? So we have, for example, the build script, we have something called build watch, build app, build lib, so on and so forth. Yeah. And basically, these are wrappers around the Angular CLI, so the ng-serve commands. But please use these scripts. Don't use the CLI directly. Now, looking at the general structure of our workspace, yeah, we have also 1 or 2 specific folders which normally in a default Angular workspace does not exist. Yeah, one is the HTML folder, and we will address that later, and one is the IMX modules folder. Now, the IMX modules folder contains all one identity specific libraries, yeah, or frameworks. So what exactly, you can see a lot of files starting with IMX -API, yeah. What those libraries are, we will explain that later. And then we have the elemental UI libraries. These are our specific UI frameworks, yeah. And these are normal NPM packages, which when you do an NPM install will go into the Node modules folder. Now, when you build with a script command an application or a couple of libraries, yeah. So when you do, for example, a build app like this, yeah, so the complete command would be something like npm run build app and then the name of the application. Yeah, the artifact, so the build itself, will end up in the dist folder. Yeah? So And we will show that later. Looking at the dist folder, you can see that we have already two folders. In this case, these are two older builds of two libraries. Yeah, as you can see, QBM and QER. And we will show what will happen if, for example, we build the portal. But we will do that later. So one word about assets and assets you want to share. So normally, if you want to share assets, you would put them, if it's an application, under the application global assets folder. So if there's something like images or style sheets you want to share across the application, please put them under the assets folder of that application. Having said that, there is also a global shared assets application folder, and it's this folder, and that's deprecated, so we are still using it, but it will go away. So please don't change anything or add anything into those files.
One of my next questions, just based on what I saw in the past, is the following. As you have seen, or as we have seen in the video series, there was always the QBM and the QER module we started. These modules was every time to start. On the other hand side, we do have modules like the attestation module, for example, which is sometimes there and sometimes not, depending on the installation of the customer. What differences exists in these modules, maybe dynamic or static, and around it?
Yeah, Herwig, that's a very good question. As you mentioned, so when you look at projects, you will see a lot of libraries like AAD, AOB, so on and so forth. And like you mentioned, Herwig, there are static and there are dynamic modules. Normally, so in the default Angular world, you only have static modules or libraries. And what does that mean? It does mean that an application or another module, AKI library, can reference libraries. But in our case, because we don't know when you look at the setup or installation at the customer side, which modules are there or not. It can be that the AAD module is installed, but perhaps not. And we don't know it at compile time, we know it at runtime. Now, on the backend side, on the server side, the system can handle that. And on the front end side, so in the Angular workspace, we handle that through dynamic modules, meaning that if you have an installation and you start the API service and you start the portal, the API service knows exactly which modules are installed and which one are not installed. Now, QBM and QER, like you mentioned, Herwig, are static modules and they are always there. So every application and every module library can reference QBM and QER. As a rule of thumb, all other modules are dynamic. They are not static. So, for example, AAD or ATT is about attestation, can use QBM and QER, but it cannot use directly AAD. This would go horribly wrong. Now, having that said, if you want to build your own library, I would suggest don't use, and that we will address that, what the difference is exactly, I mean, from a technical perspective, how dynamic modules are loaded. But I would suggest if you want to write your own custom module, don't do it in a dynamic way, simply use it in a static way.
So if I understand that correctly, Rafi, what you say there is that if I am a project developer from a partner side or from a customer side and I want to extend my web project, I should just rely on static modules like the Angular standard is, and that because all of these things I develop in my projects are typically things will be shown later on. That means I don't have that problem that something could not be installed, because in my project, typically not installed things will not happen.
Yes, exactly, exactly. The reason is the reason to use static libraries is it's simply easier. And like you said, if I write my custom library, I know that it will be always there. So I don't need to go down the path of dynamic modules. And why are dynamic modules complex? Because the application does not know anything about their existence. And if you load such a module, like for example ATT, we have special mechanism like plug-in mechanism, so on and so forth, to where you can add menus at runtime and routes and so on and so forth, so that you can really route to that and go to that to a specific component in that dynamic module. And if you use static modules, that's much easier, because you can simply reference it, and you don't need all this additional stuff like plug-in mechanisms, so on and so forth.
Thank you, Rafi. I have just one last question about the structure. If we look at this project structure, what we can see there are applications and, of course, something we call libraries or modules. However, I'm very sure that I have only one application, and I think as a project developer, it will be the standard application typically. On the other hand side, we do have the libraries. From a developer perspective, where will I add my code later on?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Now, when you look, for example, at the portal, so this is the portal, you can see that this project does not contain a lot of files or components. So our approach is that the applications are something like a thin wrapper around all the functionality and features the portal offers. So the portal itself uses, on one hand, QBM and QR in a static way. We talked about that, yeah. And when you look, for example, at QER, yeah, only as an example, but this is true for all other libraries too, QER contains a lot of components and a lot of services. So if you want to add your own stuff, yeah, so you want to build a new service, you want to build a new component, and you have your library, yeah, your custom library, I would suggest that you add it in that library and you don't put it into the portal itself, yeah, for a lot of reasons.
Okay, let me summarize that. So if I understand you correctly, what I do is the following. Typically, I will take an existing library, maybe one of these which are just there, and I will add additional components into that specific libraries. And I will do that much more often than rather, for example, just to create a complete new library. That means I will extend the existing libraries, right?
Yes. So if again, so you have two options. One is to extend existing libraries, and as we mentioned, you have static and dynamic libraries. So if you want to add something which should be always there, you can put it into QER or QBM. Yeah. If, on the other hand, for example, you want to extend attestation, which is a dynamic module, but you know that your company has attestation installed, yeah, of course, you would then go to that specific module. Yeah, attestation in that case would be ATT, yeah, and would extend that library. So you have these two options. And the third option is, if you want to add your own library, yeah, as a static library, you can also put new components and services into your custom library. So Herwig, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. That answers my question. But I have another one for you, and I hope that is my last one from a structural perspective. In the past, when I was just developing stuff in the old technology, my first goal was to reuse as much functionality as even possible. How that works here in the Angular world?
Yeah, again, a good question. Now, when you look at our two static libraries, QBM and QER, these libraries contain a lot of components which are reusable. For example, we have when you look at the portal and at the landing page, we have something like a dashboard, and you have this dashboard tiles, yeah, and these are dynamically added to the dashboard, but it's a reusable component, yeah. Then we have something called CDRs, and there will be another session only about CDRs. CDRs are column-dependent references, meaning I want to build a form, and then I want to consume in a very easy way objects from the API server. Yeah, this makes the CDR system makes life very easy, because CDRs do understand our specific object structure. But again, this is only an example. Then we have something like data tables, for example, yeah, which we can reuse everywhere. Let me just show you such an example. So when you look, for example, at the data table, yeah, it is this guy here, and this is a reusable component. There's also something called the data source toolbar and data tiles. So we have a lot of reusable components which are in QBM and QBR. Of course, when you look at dynamic libraries, they also have components, but I would suggest that you use the components which do exist or are citizens of QBM and QER.